Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
And now we come to an episode where Rainbow Dash misbehaves and her friends have to do something extreme to get her to rein in her poor behavior.
Didn't we already do Mare Duel like 5 entries ago?
No, Lefty, it's 28 pranks later.
Oh right, the better Mare Duel episode. Simply put, 28 Pranks Later is a more solid version of Mare Duel in my eyes. Unfortunately, it also hits people in a negative way of being just a remake. While I agree remakes can suck, I also believe in the philosophy that if it improves on the original version, it has every right to exist.
I've always been a firm believer in a story's execution being more important than its originality. How original a story is doesn't mean jack if the story isn't good.
Star Wars prequels.
Hey, I like the Star Wars prequels. And while 28 Pranks Later can't claim to be the most original episode, it is, without question, a superior version of the Mare Duel episode.
Oh, absolutely. This time around, I believe that not just the main 5, but the entire town was completely justified in their retaliation to Rainbow Dash's pranks. They all tried to deal with it for what seems like a pranking spree that went on for several days until they decided to get Pinky to talk to Rainbow since she loves to pull pranks as well. That's a good sign that they don't want vengeance, they just want it to stop. However, when Pinky talking to Rainbow didn't work, they decided to give Rainbow a taste of her own medicine as a last resort. Seriously, this episode shows the right way on how to get even with someone. After exhausting all of their efforts to simply deal with the pranks and then sending in someone to talk to Rainbow into toning down or ceasing her pranks altogether, that was all they had left to get it through to Rainbow that she was going too far.
That is exactly what puts this episode above Mare Duel. It goes all out in showing that other methods of getting Rainbow to cease her behavior would not work, and it's still able to play up the mystery angle without leaving the audience wondering why they didn't attempt other means of getting her to stop pranking. Which conveniently leads us to another point of contention, the claim that Rainbow's pranks are too mean-spirited to the point where she's out of character.
Well, I'd say the only arguable prank was what she did to Fluttershy, but it was really more of an elaborate way of popping out in front of someone and saying boo. After that, I can see putting a brick in Mr. Cake's sandwich somewhat hazardous, but I question how he didn't think why his sandwich was so damn heavy.
I don't think the pranks make Rainbow out of character. In fact, I'd argue she's more in character in this episode than most RD-centered episodes. No, what bugs me is that she still would have been in character if they went for less extreme pranks to begin with. Replace Cranky's wig with a clown wig. Put peanuts in Mr. Cake's sandwich. Put the boulder in Big Mac's cart before he starts pulling it. All minor changes that would have made the first act much easier to sit through. You could argue that it had to get that mean-spirited for the townsfolk to lose their cool with Rainbow, but I don't know. I was under the impression that it was the quantity of the pranks that got them to take action, not the quality.
Quite honestly, I love that they brought back the scroll spam gag from Griffin the Brush-Off and made it even funnier with Rainbow actually tricking Spike into sending Celestia 1,000 scrolls that quickly buried her and her throne.
Too bad she'll die the death of 1,000 paper cuts.
But now that we're past that, I have to give the animators a ton of credit for how creepy they made Ponyville once the zombie invasion began, especially with the Cake family coming after Rainbow and Sugar Cube Corner. I mean, getting Pound and Pumpkin in on it too was both hilarious and somewhat frightening at the same time.
I think most fans could see the twist to the episode coming a mile away, but I thought that just made it more fun, as the creep factor was tinged with a sense of hilarity. Knowing ahead of time that it's all just a prank makes it hilarious as well as creepy. Bonus points for this moment of Pinky munching on another cookie before cutting to commercials. With hindsight, it's likely just her love of sweets, but if you didn't suspect what the twist was, it serves as a subtle but brilliant lead into the second act.
Plus, the twist is kind of obvious if you've heard of the zombie movie 28 Days Later. And since the last act takes place at night, it could also be a Night of the Living Dead reference, especially with how Rainbow gets trapped in a barn.
Wow, brilliant deduction there, Sherlock. Next you'll be telling me the cake is a lie.
And that Darth Vader's Luke's father.
Or that NASCAR is boring.
What did you just—
Next entry!
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
Anyway, number 4 on our list created quite an interesting discussion when it aired last year for Season 7, and I think it was kind of appropriate that it aired during the same weekend as BronyCon, given what happens in the episode.
I may have spoken prematurely when I said that Every Little Thing She Does was the hardest episode on this list for me to defend, because many of the criticisms leveled at Fame and Misfortune are fair and well thought out. This episode has so many layers and so many things to talk about that I'll have to do a proper What Do I Know to talk about it properly at some point. But for now, we can generalize.
Boy, it was stressful trying to avoid spoilers for this episode when it first aired, but when I got home and watched it via Amazon Prime, I loved it. From that glorious face Rarity makes when she's stress sewing to Rainbow complaining she can't go to the bathroom without someone telling her how awesome she is, I thought the jokes were on point for Fame and Misfortune. But that's not all I liked about it. For one thing, I'm glad that we finally got word about the friendship journal since it just vanished after the season 4 finale. That was such an important aspect for the arc of season 4 that I was really disappointed it was never once brought up in seasons 5 or 6.
One perspective that I've heard a lot in regards to this episode is that it only exists as a deflection of criticism that many reviewers have thrown at the show and the main six. And I can certainly see that in scenes like Fluttershy being badgered by ponies, Rarity being boycotted, and Starlight's questionable word choice. But I have to ask, if this episode is only meant to be a deflection of criticism, why are only half the main six ever actually criticized? Where are all the ponies complaining about how obnoxious Pinkie Pie is? Where are all the ponies complaining about how arrogant Rainbow is? Where are all the ponies complaining about how Applejack never does anything? Remember all those best background pony jokes?
I can guarantee you'll never hear those 3 words come out of my mouth to describe AJ, but in all seriousness, I don't really see these as deflections, I see them more as explanations. Like again with the Fluttershy scene, she explained that you can't just change your personality after 1 or 2 tries at something. That's too unrealistic and contrived. I mean, look at how long Starlight's been in the show and how well paced her character development has been. I believe that simply explaining something is all fair game. What I don't necessarily agree with but won't argue over is I can understand that some people may not like how certain ponies express their criticisms. However, we have to remember that this is a cartoon and it's obvious that they're being grossly over-exaggerated.
Funny you should say that. M.A. Larson himself said on a panel that he didn't like the way he was asked to write this episode, saying that it portrayed the fanbase as little more than unreasonable assholes, and how it was a huge disservice to the fandom. I respectfully disagree, however, because throughout the episode there are just as many ponies who are praising the journal as much as there are ponies who are criticizing it. Even in the final scene, both before and after the song, there are ponies who are arguing with one another rather than hounding Twilight and company. It's more a message of how there will always be dissenting opinions in any fanbase than it is an attempt to paint critics as unreasonable, because fanbases are made up of people!
Which is another reason why I really enjoyed the episode. Unfortunately, I sort of got the impression from certain people that critics should be above criticism and that any and all responses or explanations are completely unprofessional. Look, I only agree to that if we're talking about those horrific Teen Titans Go episodes like Return of Slade that went all out to straight up insult the audience as nothing but narcissistic crybabies who should leave their show alone because it's just for kids and that nostalgia was blinding them.
Well, there's no denying that this episode takes its fair share of shots at the fandom, but I got the impression that they were more lighthearted jabs than mean-spirited punches. But that's just me.
And I definitely agree to that. While it's true that I, and for that matter you, Trigger, haven't been around the fandom as long as others, but I really never once felt like I was being targeted or being told to shut up if I had criticisms of the show. In all honesty, I just thought the episode was a fun poke at the fandom.
With all that said, there is one complaint about this episode that I totally get even if I don't completely agree with it, and that has to do with the Flawless song. The Flawless song. Oh, son of a bitch!
Oh man, I guess that Mellow Yellow withdrawal hit you harder than I thought.
Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, the song. In the wrong context, the argument that these characters aren't supposed to be perfect really doesn't hold any water. Like, if I were to use that for a clear out-of-character moment, that would not be a very good argument. But the criticisms that they're bringing up in the song are character faults that these characters have always had. The argument that nobody is perfect is basically an oversimplified version of, this poor behavior is consistent with this character's personality.
Well, I did touch upon the song a bit in my review, but I just really liked the tune. I didn't care to listen to the lyrics or think about them all that much. Then again, I'm a guy who can listen to Pour Some Sugar on Me on a loop all day, and you're gonna have an awkward time if you think too much about that particular song. So what do I know? Ah crap, now I gotta pay Trigger's fine.
It isn't the end of the list yet. I won't press charges. But what I really like about this song is it is essentially the main six acknowledging their faults. Some may think of this as a problem, being aware of your weaknesses and not really doing anything about it, but I'd argue it's the highest form of humility. You can't just fix your character faults, and being aware of them can help you keep yourself in check, and I just realized I basically just said Rainbow Dash was humble. What is life?
Hey, that kind of reminds me of Sunset Shimmer acknowledging her evil ways in Rainbow Rocks when her friends kept trying to sugarcoat what she did. So I definitely agree with you on the humility of this. As for your question about life, I always thought Mellow Yellow was life for you, Trigger.
My life has meaning once again!
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
Okay, so next up on our list is... Hey, do you hear that? Wait, stop! Oh crap, changelings. Lefty, get behind me!
Ew, we're not moldy blocks of Swiss cheese, Rambo. We're from the future. And yet the universe isn't exploding. Damn you, Back to the Future 2, you got another prediction wrong.
How do I know you're telling the truth? Give me a code phrase. A Lannister always pays his debts. Hear me roar. They're legit. What do you guys want? You can't put the cutie remark on this list.
And why's that? Since you're from the future, you already know we put Fame and Misfortune before cutie remark. How could this episode spell more doom for us than Fame and Misfortune?
We can't explain. You should never know too much about your own future. Just trust us. You don't want to put the cutie remark on this list. You guys only traveled back in time so you could do a time travel joke to tie into this entry, didn't you?
No. Oh, come on. I just made a Back to the Future 2 pun. I know you wouldn't pass up the opportunity to make another time travel joke, me.
They're on to us, Lefty. I think it's time we go back to our own time before they start asking serious questions.
Don't you mean go back to the future?
And Bright outdoes my puns again.
Well, we'll be seeing ya.
Oh, sure, us showing up from the future is unbelievable, but Bright showing up when she had no clue you were doing this video is A-okay.
Just shut up and get back into the TARDIS already.
Wait, future me, before you go. No, we haven't invented flying cars and the NASCAR playoffs still exist.
So, yeah. Disregarding that timey-wimey interruption, I will fully admit to being biased when it comes to the cutie remark. I've always been a huge sucker for time travel stories, and this one is no exception.
Oh, same for me, Trigger, though I'm sure people were able to pick up on that. What's funny is since this was the first season finale I got to watch live because season 5 was my first season as a brony, I was excited when I heard the premise. Basically, when you boil down the plot, it's literally a kid-friendly version of The Terminator, and that's freaking awesome!
I've spent most of my videos defending Starlight's plan in this episode and talking about her backstory and motivation, so I won't bore you by going over all of that. But I will say that I think her backstory could have been presented in a more sympathetic light, and I'll admit I would have preferred that the writers wait another season to reform her. But I still think the reformation and backstory work.
As I've heard a few people say, which I agree to, her reformation of being talked to and shown what consequences her action had is better than just blasting her away with magic and stripping away her villainy. I like that Starlight herself chose to listen to Twilight and accept the Alicorn's guiding hoof rather than kind of being forced to be good.
I agree. I've always been more inclined to characters who choose to be good over characters who have to reach their lowest moment before they consider the possibility that they might be wrong.
You mean kind of like Darth Vader?
Not the example I'd use, but yeah, kind of like Vader. As for Starlight's role as a villain in this episode, it is fantastic. Her plan to thoroughly humiliate Twilight and doom her to a life of despair and anguish is a level of maliciousness that I've only ever seen in Legends of Tomorrow Season 2, wherein Eobard Thawne warped reality in order to force the Legends to live in a reality that they knew wasn't right. Starlight's plan was so thorough that there wasn't any room for any Deus Ex Machina BS like other finales, and it is awesome!
And I loved the irony of her sitting in Fluttershy's throne when Twilight and Spike entered the castle at the beginning. Next to Discord's appearance in Return of Harmony, Starlight's role here as a villain is one of the best in the show by far. She was just dripping with malice when she started the time spell on the cutie map, something that filled me with a little dread when she rolls up and into the time hole. And then you add that she's willing to zap a Philly Rainbow Dash out of the sky just to prevent a Sonic Rainboom. That's a good villain.
Bit of a minor quibble, but I'm not really a fan of how Starlight had to take the time to explain how the time travel spell worked. I know that we needed to know exactly how the spell worked, but there are other ways of letting the audience know what was going on.
You know, I've never really thought about that before, but yeah, you're right. What would you have done differently? Like have Twilight and Spike notice a huge magical disturbance going on in the castle, then they go to check it out only to see Starlight being sucked up into the portal from Fluttershy's throne? She did have a head start to get back to Ponyville before Twilight and Spike, after all.
Well, no, because then we'd be left wondering how Starlight knew to activate the spell when she did. The whole reason she waited for Twilight to come home in the first place was because she wanted Twilight to follow her. No, what I would have preferred would be if Twilight met Starlight in one of the alternate universes, preferably the Somber universe, after Starlight had a chance to watch the world go to hell without the main six. This version of Starlight would want Twilight to go back to the Rain Boom and stop her, because she wants to undo the hell she's created, even if it means letting go of her revenge. So Starlight would have to explain to Twilight how this spell works, and thus the audience is clued in on what's going on.
Okay, that does work better and does a great job foreshadowing that Starlight can be changed to a good pony, but I have just one question, Trigger.
Okay, shoot.
Where does the sports almanac come into play here?
You know, I think we've used up our allotted amount of time travel jokes.
Good thing there's only 2 episodes left on our list then.
Actually, that joke kind of highlights why the writers didn't go that route, assuming they even considered it. MLP is, and always has been, aimed at kids, and there's already so much going on in this episode that it'd be hard enough for most of the target demographic to keep up as it is.
True, and that's not even counting the countless theories and story possibilities presented to us through the alternate worlds, which I know you already dabbled in.
Indeed. While it certainly could have used 1 or 2 more tweaks, I think the Cutie Remark is an excellent season finale. Though I have to wonder what it says about my taste if my favorite finale is one that even I have to admit could have been better if it had been changed a bit.
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
Okay, I am not holding back. I will defend No Second Prances to the death if I have to. I loved this episode the day it came out, and I even put it as number 3 in my top 5 favorite season 6 episodes list.
Ooh, I got something that can help with its defense. I'll be right back. Ryan Happy at your service.
Hey, where's my exosuit?
I've talked about No Second Prances a few times on my channel, though I've never directly challenged any of the criticisms leveled at it.
And all I've done is review it back when it first aired, and well, you already know it's one of my favorite season 6 episodes, so I haven't really addressed the criticisms either.
First and foremost, the idea that Twilight was villainized in this episode for the sake of the plot, that she's acting out of character, and that she's forgotten many of the lessons that she's learned over the seasons, namely the lessons she learned in the season premiere.
And right away, I disagree completely, namely because this was only Trixie's 3rd appearance in the entire show. The 2 times before this episode, she was an over-the-top narcissist whose dumbass fans in Snips and Snails caused an Ursa Minor to attack Ponyville, and then she used an evil amulet to banish Twilight and enslave Ponyville to do her bidding. Even though Trixie apologized at the end of Magic Duel and put on a fireworks show for Celestia and the Saddle Arabians, and Twilight even accepted the apology, that did not mean that Twilight 100% trusted Trixie at all. She simply accepted her apology. That's it. I can totally buy the fact that Twilight was skeptical of Starlight hanging out with Trixie.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I've talked about the difference between forgiveness and trust before, and I think that believing the two are interchangeable is not the wisest policy. And while Twilight did learn that she needed to give Starlight her space, I don't think it's a bad idea to have that lesson challenged by having Starlight make friends with someone who didn't have the best track record. It's not unlike authoritative parenting methods, which provide children with enough space to be independent and make their own decisions, but still maintain a level of control in order for the children to meet certain behavioral standards. Admittedly, she overstepped her bounds when she tried to make friends for Starlight, but I don't think her distrusting Trixie drags her character through the mud at all.
No, not at all. I think this also taught a good lesson that friendships can't be forced, like Twilight trying to get Starlight to hang out with Cranky, Vinyl, and Derpy. Heck, one of my favorite parts of the episode was Starlight and Trixie meeting for the first time at the spa because of how natural it felt. Even though I myself don't go to the spa, I see it as 2 people meeting at a place of peace, like a bookstore, you know, before Amazon ruined those.
My favorite scene would have to be Twilight properly making amends with Trixie backstage as soon as the magic show is over. Regardless of what you think of her characterization throughout the rest of the episode, there is no denying that this is true humility. Also, while we're on the subject, how did this not become a meme?
Because it was overshadowed by Rarity's no spoilers, I guess? Anyway, I still like to point out how even though Celestia had no lines in this episode at all, and I understand that some people had issues with her characterization, I loved it. Seeing Celestia act so unlike Celestia was hilarious, and the only reason I think it worked was because the ice sculpture at the dinner table had melted quite a bit, indicating that they'd been sitting there doing literally nothing for some time.
Everyone has a limit to their patience.
Yep. Though I have to admit that the episode did have a feels moment when Trixie was on stage and sounded so dejected after losing Starlight's friendship. When you've always known Trixie to be a loud showboater who loves to be the biggest ego on stage, but she sounds like she doesn't care about her show anymore, that kind of hits you.
Wow, way to make me feel bad for laughing at that. Though that seems like a good segue to talk about Trixie in this episode. Another complaint I've heard is that she too has lost many of her redeeming qualities, which I find absolutely hilarious in light of how egotistical she still is, and how hard she tries to apologize to Starlight when she got carried away.
Not to mention that since this episode has aired, she's still hilariously narcissistic and loves to showboat. Plus, I loved how she protected Starlight into where and back again when Starlight started to have a nervous breakdown in her village. How could you not love that?
Before we move on, we should probably address the oversized pachyderm in the room, the attempted suicide. Was Trixie really willing to end her life over losing the only friend she ever had? I mean, the way she talks before launching herself, you'd certainly think so, but I have my doubts. I don't think people who commit suicide would scream and cover their eyes as they hurtle towards death if they've given up on life to the point where they're willing to end it. And on top of that, Trixie adds a "please" to the end of her spiel, implying that she didn't really want her life to end.
Exactly. Personally, I think the people who stirred up this suicide thing were just clickbaiting. Trixie's self-centered and, like I said, loves to put on a show, but I don't think she would be that selfish to be purposefully eaten by a manticore in front of a live audience that included kids.
Suicide is not in his repertoire. He's far too fond of himself for that.
Well, it's been a long journey, Trigger, but we're already down to our grand finale for the video. Are you ready? Just please, for the love of Luna, do not do a recap. Our audience doesn't consist of goldfish.
Funny you should mention Luna.
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the heat flow through you.
Don't act like you didn't see this coming. The Princess's Dream of Magic Sheep was the first episode I ever talked about on my channel, and it is by far my favorite episode of Friendship is Magic.
Second favorite of mine, but I know how you feel. I adore this episode so much, and no, not solely because it's a Luna episode. For me, you, and quite a lot of others, Magic Sheep was a dream of an episode. But for other people in the fandom, well, it was a nightmare.
I can't really blame people for the extreme reactions that this episode got. Even I had to attend a psych class before I understood what the episode was really about. But still, some of the criticism leveled at this episode is weird, to say the least. I've heard people complain that Luna's creation of the Tantibus was too irresponsible, and that it somehow promotes the idea that wallowing in self-pity is somehow a good thing. And I would agree with that, if the episode's ending went something like this. I created the Tantibus to torture myself! Well, why the hell are we trying to stop it then? Huh, good point.
Good God, that would have been a terrible ending.
Yeah, I'd have more patience for this complaint if the episode tried to pass off Luna's creation of the Tantibus as a good thing, but it never does. The entire goal of the episode is to stop the Tantibus from escaping into the real world. The reveal that the Tantibus was Luna's creation doesn't change that objective. And let's not forget, the ponies are horrified that Luna created the Tantibus. So how could anyone misconstrue Luna's behavior as something to be emulated? Some people like to claim that the Tantibus is an allegory for depression, which I can kind of see if I squint at it a bit, but there's several problems with that perspective. For starters, if it was meant to be an allegory for depression, why would it escape to infect other people? The effect that the Tantibus has over others is way too direct for this to be an accurate depiction of depression. Secondly, Luna created the Tantibus. People who suffer from depression don't create depression. They fall under it due to certain experiences and circumstances in their environment. Thirdly, the Tantibus changes the pony's dreams into nightmares. Depression doesn't work like that. It doesn't scare you, it sucks away your energy, makes you lethargic. If the Tantibus was supposed to be an allegory for depression, it never would have escaped Luna's dreams, it never would have been her creation, and its effect on her would be more akin to the Dementors from Harry Potter, directly sucking away her happiness to the point where she became incapable of functioning.
You know, Trigger, I always thought the Tantibus was supposed to represent self-harm since Luna said she made it specifically to torture herself with nightmares for becoming Nightmare Moon. And the self-harm I always envisioned was cutting yourself until it gets to the point that your friends find out and they try to help you to stop hurting yourself. Then you add on that Luna plainly believes she hasn't been punished enough for her actions that night over 1,000 years ago as a reason for why she's hurting herself. And her friends' dreams could represent each of them trying an intervention to get through to Luna that she has no reason to punish herself. Though believe me, Trigger, I'm not going to pretend I'm a psychologist and say that's what it is, I just think that could be the case.
I can definitely see that, but I've always been more inclined to believe that the Tantibus was an allegory for substance abuse. Think about the events of this episode and the events that must have led up to it. She created the Tantibus as a means of punishing herself, believing that she could control it. And for a while, she could, but she eventually lost control over it to the point where it started hurting others, making them take notice, and forcing them to take action. It even ties into Twilight's line about the Tantibus feeding off of her guilt.
Aw, damn. Steve Clark.
Who?
Oh, nothing. Carry on.
This episode isn't about guilt or depression. It's about self-loathing and the extremes that it drives people to. There are people who genuinely consider themselves to be bad people and don't deserve to be happy. This episode challenges Luna's self-perception by pointing to her continuous efforts to halt the Tantibus' advance. The logic being, if you're such a terrible person, why are you doing everything in your power to stop this evil you created? A genuinely bad person would never try so hard to keep people from harm. And don't say that she was the one who caused that harm, because my point still stands regardless.
Believe it or not, this actually reminds me of the movie Top Gun, where Tom Cruise's character blames himself for the death of his co-pilot halfway through the film. He's so shaken up over what happened and doesn't like hearing anyone else at the school tell him it wasn't his fault. He never even casts blame on the pilots who were flying in front of his jet when the incident took place. In fact, we even see Tom Cruise cleared of any wrongdoing in a little courtroom setting, but he lost his edge and nearly quit the Navy over what happened. This ties into what I said earlier about Luna believing she wasn't punished enough for becoming Nightmare Moon. There are people out there who do suffer from this, and even though they have the support of their friends, they're so upset at themselves that they think if no one else will properly punish them, then they'll just have to do it.
I'll be the first to admit that I think the ending is a tad rushed, but I think it works because we never really see the Tantibus get destroyed. So while it's shown that she can enjoy peaceful dreams again, there remains the possibility that the Tantibus is not really gone. And we haven't even talked about the rest of the episode. The main six's dreams, the nightmares, the battle itself, stunning animation, hilarious writing. This episode is an epic two-parter without actually being a two-parter. It's everything I love about Friendship is Magic.
Oh, but that's not all. Ever since I saw this episode, I always loved how well done the homage to Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was. It's sort of subtle, especially to those who haven't seen it, but it's there thanks to that battle. In Nightmare Part 3, there is a girl who can control her dreams and allow other people to enter them. This is utilized to have the last of the Elm Street children fight off Freddy Krueger in their dreams once and for all so that he can finally be defeated. And all of the Elm Street kids dream of themselves as powerful and badass, just like the ponies of Ponyville do to fight off the Tantibus, which represents Freddy. The main six, Spike, and Ponyville are literally the Dream Warriors.
You watch way too many movies, Lefty. If you put a gun to my head and demanded that I find fault with something in this episode, I'd point to Luna's explanation for why she didn't ask Celestia for help.
There is nothing my sister can do. She has no power in the realm of sleep.
I mean, even if Celestia doesn't, why not at least tell her what's going down?
I can buy that Luna didn't think Celestia could help, given that she didn't realize how much power the main six actually had in the dreamscape until they themselves figured it out. What I can't buy is that she didn't think to inform Celestia of the situation so that she could prepare for the worst. I know there probably wasn't much Celestia could do, but still. Yet that is a minor element that does not detract from the episode in any way. This episode is my favorite episode of Friendship is Magic, and the most overhated episode in the show. Bite me! But don't bite Lefty though, he's not very tasty.
Don't insult the horror movie fan while defending an episode that's an homage to a horror movie. You're just gonna have a bad time. Anyway, I do kind of see the complaint that the ending is a bit rushed, but when we're talking about someone battling self-loathing, every case is going to be a different one, and certain people will finally realize that they're not bad people in different ways in different amounts of time. For Luna, she just needed the assurance of several of her closest friends and to be shown she's fighting, not encouraging or defending, the Tantibus. It sort of ties into a good message of talking to your friends can make a huge difference.
I'm Officer Trigger Happy.
And I'm Mr.LeftTurn.
And we're going to get the Tartarus out of here! Floor it, Lefty! that was a close one. Thanks for letting me borrow your car, Lefty.
Oh, no problem. Oh, and about not biting me, Trigger.
Rikiwa. Yuchi. Blizzard.
Blizzard what? Her sword.
Hey, Trigger! Trigger? Hey, are you frozen in place? Ha! You're frozen in place! Hey guys! Trigger's frozen, he can't even move! How embarrassing!
You are both going on my most wanted list.
You might want to take care of him first before he stabs you in the back.